The wind clawed at the walls of the Hargrove cabin long before dawn, dragging loose snow across the frozen plains like sheets of white ash. Elias Hargrove stood barefoot on the wooden floor, his breath fogging the air inside the single-room home. He was only 11, but in that moment he looked older, his eyes fixed on the thin crack of light slipping beneath the door. The sheriff's men were outside again, and this time they weren't bothering to hide their voices. The hinges groaned as the door swung open, letting in a blast of cold that cut straight through his shirt. Two men hauled a long, mud-stained stretcher into view. A shape lay beneath a tarp, heavy, still. Elias didn't have to see the face. He saw the hat, his father's hat. The sheriff pulled back the tarp with a practiced flick. Frost clung to the man's beard, to the collar of his worn coat, to the creases of his hands. The body had been dragged from the Missouri River at first light, tangled in willow branches like a trapped animal. The sheriff spoke, but Elias heard nothing. Only the wind, only the sound of his mother gasping behind him. Then everything dissolved, like snow melting into the earth. 3 days earlier, the cabin smelled of boiled roots and damp wool. Elias crouched by the stove, stirring the thin stew that refused to thicken no matter how long it cooked. Behind him, Ruth and Marion clung to each other under a single blanket, their small faces hollowed by the early winter. Their mother, Anna, lay propped against the wall, coughing into a rag already stained with blood she tried to hide. The harvest had failed. The credit ledger at the Beckett Ranch had become a noose, and the disappearance of their father, gone for 8 days now, had turned whispers into certainty. Elias glanced at the pot. Steam rose weakly, carrying almost no scent. He dipped the spoon, brought it to his mouth, and hesitated. Then he set it aside. The girls needed it more. They always would. Outside, the plains stretched in every direction. Endless, white, merciless. Town was 4 miles away, but to the Hargroves it might as well have been another country. No one there would help them. Not after what happened with the lumber contract. Not after the accusations that had followed. Poor families didn't win fights against men like Owen Beckett. Elias turned when he heard the mother whisper his name. "Don't let them go hungry," she breathed, her voice shaking like a loose shutter in the wind. He nodded, though a knot twisted hard inside him. He already wasn't eating. Not properly. But he wouldn't say that. Not when looking into her sunken eyes. Night fell early in Montana that time of year, swallowing the sky before supper. Elias secured the door and checked on the girls again. Marion slept with a small fist curled beneath her chin. Ruth kept one arm around her sister, as if afraid winter might steal her away in her sleep. The boy wrapped a scarf around himself and stepped outside. The cold hit him like a slap. He moved toward the shed, hoping to find at least a handful of grain the mice hadn't taken. The shed door creaked, dry and brittle. Empty barrels stared back at him. He was turning to leave when he spotted footprints, fresh, crisp, leading away from the barn. Not his, not his mother's, and far too large to belong to either of the girls. He followed them with cautious steps across the yard, past the frozen trough, past the fence where his father used to hang the lantern during storms. The track stopped abruptly near the edge of the property, as if the man had stood there for a long time, watching. Elias swallowed hard and backed away, eyes scanning the dark. The plains were silent, except for the wind. He returned to the cabin, heart hammering, and barred the door. But a few hours later, long after the fire had died and the cold had crept under every blanket, someone knocked. A single, deliberate knock. Not a neighbor's greeting, not a plea for help. A summons, or a warning. Elias stood frozen while the girls stirred awake. Anna tried to rise but failed. The knock came again, soft, almost polite, but unmistakably intentional. When Elias finally opened the door, a stranger stood framed by the snowstorm. His coat was expensive, his expression unreadable, and he carried something under his arm that made Elias's stomach twist. His father's ledger. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I believe we need to talk," he said. "About your father." And in that moment, Elias understood. The real danger had only just reached their door. Snow battered the cabin roof through the night, But inside, the stranger's presence chilled the room far more than the storm. He set the ledger on the table with a soft thud, brushing away frost from its worn cover. Elias stood between him and the girls, fists clenched though his arms trembled. His mother, too weak to rise, watched with narrowed eyes. The man removed his gloves slowly, deliberately. "My name is Thaddeus Pike," he said. "I worked for your father." Or rather, alongside him, in matters he did not care to discuss at home. The statement hung in the air like a knife. Elias didn't move. Pike's accent wasn't local, too polished for Montana's rough plains, the kind of voice that belonged to men who made decisions from warm offices, not frozen fields. Pike flipped open the ledger. Elias glimpsed pages of numbers, notes, debts, signatures, evidence of a world adults spoke about only in whispers. The stranger tapped a line with his gloved finger. "Your father owed Mr. Beckett a substantial amount, more than he could ever repay." He looked up, eyes sharp as broken glass. But that wasn't what killed him. Silence. Even the storm paused, as if listening. Pike closed the book. There was an argument. One I witnessed from a distance. Your father confronted Beckett about falsified charges, threatened to expose him. Foolish, really. One does not threaten a man who practically owns half the territory. Elias felt the room tilt. His father, the man who taught him to trap rabbits, to tie fishing knots, to scrub mud from his boots before coming inside, had walked straight into danger. And now he was gone. Marion whimpered. Ruth pulled her close. Pike leaned back in the chair, stretching as though the cabin were his. "I thought you might want to know the truth, and perhaps—" He studied Elias as though weighing him on a scale. "Perhaps you'd like to finish what your father started." Anna's breath caught. "Leave my son out of this," she rasped. But Pike only smiled. "Mrs. Hargrove, the boy's already in it. All of you are. You're on Beckett's ledger too, whether you realize it or not." He stood, snapped the ledger shut, and slipped his gloves back on. "I'll return in a few days. Think hard about your choices. Winter is long, and help is scarce." He stepped out into the storm, vanishing as quickly as he had arrived. Elias stared at the door long after it closed. Something inside him twisted, fear, anger, confusion knitting into a single sharp resolve. If Pike knew what happened, others did too, and someone was keeping that truth buried under snow and silence. The next morning, the wind eased, leaving the plains eerily quiet. Elias ventured outside, scanning for footprints. Nothing. Pike had come and gone like a ghost. Inside, the girls were hungry again. Ruth tried to hide it, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty stove. Marion rubbed her stomach without thinking. Elias felt the sting of guilt. He checked their dwindling supplies. 1 sack of flour scraped nearly clean, 3 potatoes wrinkled beyond recognition, and a jar of beans they'd been saving for Sunday. He made a decision. "Come on," he told Ruth, handing her his coat. "We're going out." She blinked. "Where?" "To find food." Her face hardened, fear mixed with trust. She nodded. They trudged across the brittle snow toward the old trade path leading to town. Elias knew they likely wouldn't find generosity there, but they had no other choice. Hunger gnawed at him too, but he forced it down, telling himself the same vow he repeated each morning. They would eat, even if he didn't. The sky darkened as they approached the abandoned mining shack 2 miles from home. Elias searched inside, turning over crates, brushing aside dust and old spider webs. Nothing. Just splintered wood and the smell of rust and cold. Ruth sat on a crate, shivering. "Elias, what if Pike comes back? What if Beckett—" He shook his head. "We'll deal with them. First we keep you and Marion alive." He didn't admit the truth. Each day his body felt lighter, weaker. A dull ache settled in his ribs like a warning. He ignored it. Survival wasn't about comfort. It was about choices. As they left the shack, a faint sound broke the silence. Hooves. Approaching fast. Elias grabbed Ruth's hand and pulled her behind a boulder. She trembled against him as a horse emerged from the tree line, its rider hunched, coat flapping in the wind. Not Pike. Not a townsman. Owen Beckett himself. The rancher scanned the terrain, his face twisted in something between suspicion and rage. Snow clung to his boots and beard. His hand rested on the rifle strapped to his saddle. Elias held his breath. Beckett dismounted, walked to the shack, and kicked open the door. His voice boomed across the plains. "I know you've been here." Ruth buried her face in Elias's shoulder. Beckett stepped back into the snow, turning slowly, eyes sweeping the land as though he could smell their fear. Then his gaze stopped. Right on the boulder where Elias and Ruth hid. A slow, cruel smile crossed his face. Beckett's boots crunched over the snow with deliberate, heavy confidence. Elias felt Ruth stiffen beside him, her breath hitching as the rancher advanced. For a moment it seemed as though Beckett might reach around the boulder and drag them out by their coats, but a gust of wind swept across the plains, carrying a distant whistle, sharp, metallic. Beckett paused, scowled, and turned his head toward the sound. Someone else was out there. "Damn fools," Beckett muttered, swinging back into the saddle with surprising agility for a man his size. He kicked the horse hard, sending it galloping toward the ridge. Within seconds, he disappeared beyond the snow-dusted pines. Elias exhaled shakily. Ruth clung to his sleeve. "Why was he searching for us?" she whispered. He wished he had an answer. Instead, he took her hand and began the long walk home. By late afternoon, the temperature dropped sharply, the kind of cold that seeped into bone and memory. The cabin's thin walls groaned as Elias and Ruth pushed through the wind, their clothes stiff with frost. When they reached home, Elias immediately checked the windows, the door, the yard, half expecting Beckett to be waiting in the shadows. But the cabin was undisturbed. Inside, Marion slept curled beside their mother, her breaths shallow and warm against Anna's arm. The room smelled faintly of smoke and sickness. Elias knelt beside the stove, coaxing the last scraps of wood into flame. Their mother stirred. "You shouldn't have gone far," she murmured, voice raw. "We were careful," Elias replied. He didn't mention Beckett. Anna touched his cheek with trembling fingers. Her eyes, usually soft, usually patient, were sharp with fear. "Your father. He tried to shield us from men like him. Owen Beckett doesn't forget debts or disobedience." Elias swallowed. "Mama, what did Papa do?" The question hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Anna closed her eyes, chest rising and falling with effort. "He refused to sign over the land," she whispered. "Beckett wanted all the property between the river and the ridge. He offered pennies. Your father refused, and then—" Her voice broke. "He told your father that accidents happen in winter." Ruth flinched. Elias felt the world tilt. Beckett hadn't been searching for them at random. He was tying up the last loose ends. Over the next few days, the food supply dwindled to almost nothing. Elias gave the girls his share every time. He hid it well, chewing before them, swallowing air instead of stew, drinking water whenever hunger clawed too fiercely. But his body noticed. His steps grew unsteady. His hands shook when he carried firewood. Ruth noticed first. One evening, while Elias mended a broken bootstrap by the stove, she knelt beside him, studying his face with unsettling seriousness. "You're lying," she said softly. He froze. "About what?" "About eating." Her eyes glistened. "I watch you. You pretend. You're giving everything to us." Marion looked up from the blanket, suddenly alert. "Elias?" He forced a smile, too weak to be convincing. "I'm fine." But Ruth shook her head, fierce as only a child desperate to protect can be. "Papa wouldn't want you to die for us." The word struck harder than the cold wind ever had. Elias looked away, toward the shuttered window, the vast plains beyond it, the storm clouds creeping closer each day. "I made a promise," he said, "and I'm keeping it." Ruth wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "Then I'm keeping you alive." She stood abruptly, grabbed her coat, and started toward the door. "Ruth, where are you going?" Elias pushed himself upright too fast, nearly falling. "To find help," she replied. "Someone has to know what Beckett did." "Ruth, stop!" Elias caught her arm. Panic surged through him, not just fear of Beckett, but fear of the cold, the wolves, the invisible hunger waiting in the snow. You can't just go out alone. She trembled. But you're getting worse, I can see it. He held her tightly, whispering, I'm not letting anything happen to you. Or to Marion. Ruth's resolve cracked. She buried her face in his chest. Elias felt how fragile she'd become, how light. The cabin door rattled suddenly. A sharp rapping. Not wind. Not snow. Someone was outside. Elias motioned the girls behind him and stepped toward the door, heart pounding. The knock came again. 3 quick taps, urgent but controlled. He unlatched the door, opening it just wide enough to see a face half hidden by a scarf. Not Pike. Not Beckett. Someone Elias hadn't expected to see ever again. The bookkeeper from Beckett's ranch. The man his father once called the only honest soul on that cursed property. His eyes were wide with fear. Elias, he whispered, you have to come with me. Now. Before Beckett finds out what I've done. And behind him, barely visible through the swirling snow, Elias saw it. A trail of blood leading up to the cabin door. Snow lashed sideways across the plains, erasing shapes, softening sounds, swallowing the world in blinding white. But the trail of blood remained. A dark, broken line disappearing into the storm behind the bookkeeper. Elias stared at it, a cold weight sinking through his chest. Come, the bookkeeper urged, gripping Elias's arm with trembling fingers. We don't have much time. Elias instinctively stepped back, pulling Ruth and Marion with him. What happened? Who's bleeding? The man looked over his shoulder, as if expecting a rifle to appear from the storm. His usually tidy hair was matted with ice. His spectacles cracked at one corner. I am, he said. Beckett's men caught me taking documents from the office. I got away, but barely. Those papers prove everything. The forged debts, the illegal contracts. Your father wasn't the first, just the one who fought back hardest. Elias's stomach twisted. Why come here? The bookkeeper swallowed. Because you're still alive. And Beckett knows you might carry your father's knowledge. He won't let loose ends walk. The words cut deeper than the cold. Elias's mother, pale and feverish, tried to sit up. Sir, she rasped. My children. I'm here for them, he said, lowering his voice. I can get them out, but only if we move now. Elias stepped into the open doorway. The wind knifed past him. Where would we go? There's a deputy in Helena, one of the few who still believes in justice, the bookkeeper replied. He agreed to hide us and take Beckett down once we had proof. I have that proof now. He pressed a bundle of papers against Elias's chest. The boy felt the rough edges through his thin shirt. Behind him, Ruth tugged on his sleeve. Elias, are we going? He looked down at her, at Marion shivering under the blanket, at their mother sinking back against the wall with a soft moan. The decision was too big, too fast. The bookkeeper glanced over his shoulder again. Beckett's searching every homestead tonight. He knows I ran this direction. If we stay here, he'll come. A gust of wind slammed the door against its hinges. And that was when Elias heard it. Hoofbeats, faint, distant, rhythmic, growing closer. Panic surged into Elias's throat. He grabbed his coat, shoved Ruth's mittens into her hands, and lifted Marion with a strength that defied the hollow ache in his stomach. Get Mama ready, he told Ruth. Quick. But Anna shook her head weakly. I can't walk, she whispered. Not in this cold. Elias hesitated. We can carry you. No, she said firmly, gripping his wrist. If you try to take me, none of you will make it out. Listen to me. Her voice shook, but her gaze was steady. You are the only chance they have. Marion whimpered. Ruth covered her mouth with a trembling hand. The bookkeeper stepped inside and shut the door against the wind. She's right. We have to move. Now. Elias felt torn apart. Between love and survival. Between staying and dying, between leaving and living with what that choice meant. Anna cupped his face with both hands. Elias, protect them, just as you've been doing. Go. Hoofbeats thundered now, close enough to rattle the window panes. Elias kissed his mother's forehead, tasting cold and salt. Then he turned to the girls. Stay close to me, he whispered. The bookkeeper opened the back door, revealing a world swallowed whole by white. They stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked Elias off his feet, but he held Marion tight and pulled Ruth alongside him. Behind them, the cabin stood small and fragile against the swallowing dark. A lantern glowed in its window, his mother's last light. Then the sound they feared broke through the storm. Voices, shouting. Beckett's men were at the front door. Elias didn't look back. They trudged through waist-high drifts toward a cluster of pines where the bookkeeper had hidden a sleigh. Elias felt his breath burning in his chest. His muscles shook with exhaustion. Hunger pulsed through him like a slow, crushing tide. Ruth stumbled. Elias caught her, but the effort nearly sent him to his knees. "We're almost there," he said, though he wasn't sure. The bookkeeper climbed into the sleigh first, pulling the reins free. Elias lifted the girls inside before climbing up himself, vision blurring. "Hold on," the bookkeeper warned. They lurched forward, racing across the frozen land as moonlight flickered through broken clouds. Behind them, voices rose again, Beckett's men realizing their prey had escaped. For a moment, Elias felt hope crack through the fear, until a gunshot split the night. The horses shrieked. Elias ducked, shielding the girls as snow burst upward from the bullet's impact. "Faster!" he shouted. The bookkeeper cracked the reins desperately. Another shot. Closer. Ruth screamed. Then Elias felt it, a sudden, burning weakness sliding through him as if the hunger he had fought for days finally sank claws into his spine. His vision wavered. The world tilted. The girls were still breathing. That was all that mattered. But Elias knew, with chilling certainty, that he couldn't keep up much longer. And Beckett was still coming. The sleigh jolted violently as it crossed a frozen creek bed, the runners striking hard ice that sent pain shooting up Elias's legs. He clung to the wooden side, vision swimming in and out of focus. Every breath felt thin, every heartbeat heavier than the last. Hunger no longer gnawed, it hollowed. It carved him out from the inside. Ruth and Marion huddled against him, their small bodies trembling. The bookkeeper whipped the reins, urging the horses forward as the storm thickened. "We're close!" he shouted over the wind. "There's an old trapper's cabin ahead. We can shelter there until morning." But behind them, the thunder of hooves grew louder. Beckett's men were gaining. Snow blurred the world into shifting ghosts. Elias tried to sit upright, though the strength in his spine wavered like a failing candle. The cold pressed deep into him, deeper than fear, deeper than will. He had given his food to the girls again that morning, and the morning before, and before that. His body was a whisper now. "Elias," Ruth said, gripping his sleeve. "Stay awake." "I'm fine," he lied, though the words barely reached his own ears. The sleigh careened around a narrow bend where dead pines leaned like mourners. A rope of wind whipped across them, stinging their faces with shards of ice. Ahead through the swirling white, Elias spotted the shape of a cabin, small, crooked, barely standing, but salvation. The bookkeeper pulled hard on the reins. The horses skidded to a stop beside the door. Inside, "Quick!" Elias lifted Marion into his arms, but his knees buckled. Ruth grabbed his arm, helping him stumble across the snow. The bookkeeper forced the door open, and they spilled into the dark, dusty interior where the cold lingered, but the wind could not reach. Elias set Marion down gently. Ruth shut the door and pushed a fallen beam against it for support. The bookkeeper lit a lamp with shaking hands. The glow revealed a room barren except for an overturned chair and a pile of pelts stiff with age. But it was shelter, and it would have to be enough. "Are they still behind us?" Ruth whispered. The bookkeeper peered through a crack in the wooden boards. "I don't see them." But Elias did not feel safe. The storm masked sound too well. Beckett had hunted men for less than what they carried in those papers. Ruth touched Elias's face. "You're freezing." He managed a faint smile. "Just tired." "No," she said firmly. "Not just tired." He couldn't argue. The truth pressed hard against him, his legs trembling, his hands numb, his thoughts drifting like loose snow. Marion crawled into his lap and tucked her head under his chin. "Stay with us," she murmured. He held her close, feeling how warm she was, How alive. A warmth he wanted them to keep. The bookkeeper unrolled the documents beside the lantern. Ledgers, forged signatures, debt schemes, threats scrawled in Beckett's handwriting. "This will end him," he whispered. "If we can survive long enough to deliver it." A thud struck the cabin wall. Everyone froze. Another. Then a voice, deep and cold and unmistakably certain. "Bring me the boy." Ruth's breath caught. Marion whimpered. Elias's heart thudded weakly against his ribs. Beckett. He was here. The bookkeeper grabbed the girls and pushed them behind a stack of crates. Elias tried to stand, but his legs failed. The bookkeeper knelt beside him. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "You hold the key to everything. They don't know how weak you are. That's our advantage." He placed the papers in Elias's coat. Elias tried to close his fingers around them, but couldn't. The door shook as Beckett slammed his shoulder against it. "You think you can run?" Beckett roared. "Your father ran too." Ruth broke into silent tears. Marion clutched Elias's coat. The bookkeeper whispered, "When he breaks through, I'll distract him. Take the girls out the back window. Run for the river. There's a telegraph station at Willow Point. Send word to the deputy." Elias nodded, but he knew the truth. He wouldn't make it that far. He hadn't eaten properly in more than a week. His body was shutting down, quiet and certain. But the girls, small, light, hopeful, they could. Beckett struck the door again. The beam cracked. The bookkeeper's eyes met Elias's. Knowing eyes. Sorrowful eyes. "You're stronger than he'll ever be," he whispered. "Your father would be proud." The next hit splintered wood across the floor. Elias pulled the girls close, kissed their foreheads and whispered, "Go with him, listen, stay together." Ruth shook her head violently. "Not without you." "You will," he said, steady at last. "You must." The door burst inward. Cold flooded the cabin. Beckett stepped through, rifle in hand, snow clinging to his boots like ash. Elias rose, unsteady, shaking, barely breathing, but he put himself between the rancher and his sisters. His last strength, his last choice. And as Beckett's eyes narrowed, Elias understood what his father had faced. The bookkeeper seized the girls, dragging them toward the back window. Beckett raised the rifle. Elias did not move. He didn't need to. He had already done what he came into this world to do. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Your voice helps keep these forgotten histories alive. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping narratives from America's hidden past. Like the video, share it with someone who loves powerful storytelling, and help this channel grow.